Well, good afternoon. It's good to be, as Connie said, good to be back. Back in town, not only to be back at the Rotary, but back in town. I just came through town last week, and in fact, I come here, if for no other reason, I come through this way every fall, because I go hunting in Crawford County between Seneca and Gays Mills, and it's on the way to my deer camp. This is the way I cut around as opposed to the bypass coming by, so I'm always, at some point or another, usually stopping for gas in Waunakee and making the rounds. As Connie mentioned, I'm running for governor, and real simple, I'm running because I love this state. I believe in Wisconsin. But I believe this governor and the current leadership in the state capitol has taken this government in the wrong direction. And I'd like to turn it around because I think it's time we put the government back on the side of the people again. I'm going to talk in a second about what I do as the county executive over in Milwaukee County. It is an interesting contrast to the Dane County executive and what's happened here lately as well. But maybe I spend a minute just telling you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Delavan, which is actually about the same size, a little bit smaller than Waunakee. It's about 8,000 people down in Walworth County. My dad was a minister. I guess that makes me the son of a preacher man. Be a good song out there, something like that, right? But my dad was a minister. My mother worked part-time and raised my brother and I. Certainly they were great role models. But I did other things as well. I was involved in sports and band and other extracurriculars. I'm proud to say I'm an Eagle Scout. Learned a lot from all those things. 25 years ago, I went to Badger Boys State up in Ripon College. And the program there teaches you about government and politics, but more importantly there, and then when I went out to Washington, the Boys Nation, it was the American Legion veterans that put on that program that taught me more than those other things, taught me about public service, the importance of serving others, whether it be in elected office or anywhere else in life. And all those things that make me not only who I was as a young person, but who I am today, but probably one of the most enduring influences for me coming out of my youth and an impact on who I am today was my grandmother. My grandmother was raised during the Great Depression. In fact, my mother's an only child, so my kids never believe her when she tells us these stories, but my mother was raised on a farm where they didn't have indoor plumbing until she went off to high school. Kids just somehow think she's making that up, but as we all know from stories or maybe firsthand, know that that's not unlikely. My grandmother, they found ways to get by. In 1974, she became a widow, and my grandfather, her husband, passed away. And from that point up until recently, when she just passed away not too long ago in her 90s, what was impressive to me is through all that time, she lived by herself, paid her own bills, cooked her own food, did her own thing, and was able to get by largely by being not just self-sufficient, but frugal. In fact, when my brother and I were kids, we used to spend part of the summer with her, and we'd joke we'd go out to places like McDonald's. They didn't have good Culvers back then, but we would go out to McDonald's thank you, to grab something to eat with her. We would swear she'd bring so many coupons that we thought we got paid to eat there. But that's how frugal she was, and that rubbed off on me. Later in life, today I still drive the same Saturn I bought back in the fall of 1997 when I was commuting back and forth between Madison and Wauwatosa, where I live. It's got 104,000 miles on it, but it still works. My kids want me to get a new car so they can get that because they're in high school now. But we still drive the same car. Last year, my kids are in sports in high school. It's kind of funny. I stopped at Johnson Creek with them one day to get some shoes at the Nike outlet, and they were so embarrassed because my tennis shoes, I think they thought, were straight leftover from the 1990s that they offered to buy me a new pair. And I laughed about that, saying, because when a teenager's willing to give up some of their money, you you must be really pushing it. And when I came up to the Milwaukee area years ago to go to Marquette University, I started working at IBM to pay for school. When I was there, I started packing a lunch each day. And then when I worked at the American Red Cross, I did that again. And for the 8.5 years I served in the state assembly, I did that. And today, and most days, when I go into the courthouse as the county executive, I still pack a lunch. And the reason I tell you that is, as I travel the state, I find all over the place people who are packing their own lunches or doing other things to save money. And I, for one, would like a government that had to save money like the rest of us do. Wouldn't you? I mean, it's just, we're all making it during these tough times, but we're making it by cutting back. The government, both here, just down the way in Madison and in Washington, just isn't cutting it that way. And so part of the reason why I'm running for governor is because I would like to turn this government around so that the people of the state can get working again. In fact, I laid out a plan about 2 months ago down at the Monona Terrace in front of Business Day. Statewide Chamber of Commerce put it together, and I laid out a plan to say if we get government out of the way of business, we can help businesses in this state lower the cost and ultimately create more jobs. Not through the government, but through the people. And so I laid that plan out. I said it's largely based on what I call a little bit of brown bag common sense, which is 3 simple principles. My grandmother would love these. First off, don't spend more money than you have. Secondly, smaller government is better government. And third, people create jobs, not the government. And a lot of politicians have that the other way around. They think the government creates jobs. The government doesn't create jobs. It either creates an opportunity that's either better or worse for jobs, positive or negative for the economy. And I want to live in a state that's better for this economy. So we laid out 6 specific things that I'd like to see done as your next governor. First up, I'd cut taxes. I'd cut taxes on employers. I'd cut taxes on individuals. I'd help cap off property taxes. I'd even phase out state taxes on retirement income, because we've got too many of our retirees taking their wealth and the jobs that are associated with it down to Florida and Arizona and Texas and Tennessee and anywhere else where there's a better tax climate. I want that money and that wealth and those people back in Wisconsin. You even look at other standards out there, and I see Joe Henry out here, and I've been out the farm there, and I know for others who farm, we got to make sure that we keep things like farmland use value assessment so that the farms in this state can actually afford to be here. And that's a big difference in the race for governor, because the mayor of Milwaukee, just like the mayor before him, want to repeal that. That would be devastating, particularly in urban and rural areas where there's a mix. That would be devastating to our farm population and the impact that would have on higher property taxes. We got to deal with cutting taxes overall. Secondly, we got to cut through the red tape. Probably for a lot of small and mid-sized employers, that's an even bigger challenge than just the tax burden. It's the cost of complying with state, local, federal regulations out there. We got to cut through the regulatory reform and make sure that the few regulations we have, and I'm all for those that are based on public safety and public health, but I think it far goes beyond that, at least for most state agencies, the DNR and everything in between. The few regulations we have should be science-based and predictable. When you take out a permit, it shouldn't take you 2 days one time, 2 weeks another, and 2 months the time in between. It should be consistently the same. Everywhere else in society, in the private sector, you rely on people to do things on a dependable basis. Why we shouldn't do that in government, to me, is something I'd like to change. Third up, we got to deal with the litigation burden in this state. That means reducing the number of frivolous lawsuits, dealing with the lawsuit abuse. Last year we almost made it worse in this state when the governor proposed taking joint and several liability down to 1%. Thankfully, we passed that bullet, but we shouldn't have to play defense in this state. We should be on the offense when it comes to job creation. You look at the states that have lowered the cost of doing business by reducing the tax burden, reducing the regulatory burden, reducing the litigation burden in those states. Those are the states that even over the past couple of years have seen job growth and seen budgets that are fully intact. You look back in 2008 and 2000 in the state of Texas, that one state created more jobs than all 49 states combined. They got a low tax burden, they got a low regulatory burden, they got a pro-job, pro-business governor, and passed tort reform. That made the difference. Compare that to California, where they keep raising taxes on people with wealth and businesses, and you can't see people leave that state fast enough. It's like rats falling off a sinking ship. It's unbelievable. Compare it to other states. You look not just at the big states, you look at Tennessee versus Kentucky, New Hampshire versus Maine. The difference in each of those states are the states that lower the cost of doing business are the states that have seen job growth and are the states that see a healthier state budget. In addition to those first 3 things about getting government out of the way of business, the other thing we got to do is partner so that our businesses and our employers are ready to move forward. And one of those, the 4th item, is making sure we got a world-class education system. Now, there are thousands of reasons for being for great education in this state. In my mind, I've got 2, Matt and Alex. Those are my 2 sons at Wauwatosa East High School. For every parent in this room, for every grandparent, for every person who cares about children, you're talking about working with kids and the whole bit. It is a moral imperative that every kid in this state, be it at a public, a private, or homeschool environment, every kid in this state has access to a world-class education system. But I also look around this room and think there's probably a lot of employers here as well. As employers, it is an economic imperative that we have a world-class education system as well. And the reason for that is simply this. One of the reasons we're still globally competitive here in Wisconsin isn't because of our tax or regulations or litigations. We need to bring those things down. But one of the reasons, even with those burdens, we're still competitive globally here is because we got a great workforce. We got well-trained, well-prepared people who come out of a great education system, not only K through 12, but in our University of Wisconsin system, in our technical schools, in our private schools and colleges. We've got a great education system in the state. We got to make sure we continue to have that, and that means demanding accountability and assessment, knowing every district, every administrator, and ultimately every teacher is succeeding. I want to pay for performance. I want to reward those teachers and schools and administrators who do well. I want to say they should be rewarded just like we do everywhere else in society. And for those who have students that aren't, we need to give them help. And ultimately, if they can't, then we need to find somebody else to fill in that spot. Everywhere else in life, we pay for performance. In my mind, we should do that when it comes to education. Probably one of our most important things that we do in our society to prepare not only young people, but prepare the next age of the workforce that will get the state working again. Fifth up, we got to deal with health care. But not the way they're talking about in Washington. You know, in Washington, they talk about access and quality. By any measure out there, we rank near the top when it comes to access and quality in Wisconsin, even today, without any help from the federal government. The reality is, what I hear time and time again crossing the state is the real problem is cost. The cost of providing quality health care to our employees, to the people of this state. In fact, the things they're talking about in Washington not only don't help, in many cases, they make it harder to provide low-cost health care for employers in this state. There are a series of things we can do, from something as simple as removing the state tax on health savings accounts, which would be a tremendous benefit for small businesses, for family farmers and others who want to tap into that. We could make sure that we have full disclosure and transparency when it comes to healthcare costs, so as an employer you actually know what you're buying into, and there aren't these big gaps with discounts for larger employers that you can't account for in a smaller business. We need to make sure that small businesses and mid-sized employers have access to larger purchasing pools so you can share the risk. You know, if you got 10 people working at your business and one person gets a critical illness, your premiums are going through the roof. The larger the purchasing pool you can share that risk with, the less likely your premiums are to go up, the more control you have there. All those are things that are market-driven solutions. They're not government mandates. And finally, we need to have a strong infrastructure system in this state. That means reliable and cost-effective power. It means the kind of power that isn't necessarily what the governor and the mayor of Milwaukee are talking about when they talk about this global warming task force. You know, I'm all for being green, but being green should be about making green or saving green. It shouldn't be about taking more green out of my pocket. And unfortunately, that's what they're talking about in Madison. It's about things that will cost us tens of thousands of jobs. We need to have reliable and cost-effective power from multiple means, but we can't do it at the expense of jobs in this state. The other part of infrastructure is transportation. We have got to have a strong transportation system in this state, and that means putting our money into roads and bridges and byways and not spending $810 million on a so-called high-speed rail line between Milwaukee and Madison. We can't afford it. It isn't effective. We need to make sure that the dollars we do spend are spent on filling in that hole that this current governor created in the transportation fund, which not only takes away from state highways and interstates, but takes away from town roads and county trunk highways and streets here in town and everywhere else. We've taken $1.3 billion out of that fund under this governor. We got to make sure we stop that and instead reinvest in the transportation infrastructure we need to get our product from one part of the region to the other. Those are the 6 things I think will get this state working again. Those are the 6 things that I think will get Wisconsin working again in the future. Now, the interesting thing is when I said this over at the Monona Terrace a couple months ago, the first time, you would have thought I dropped a nuclear bomb. I mean, the press went wild, the liberals went crazy, even the other Republicans said it can't be done. Well, let me tell you, I got a little experience with naysayers. 8 years ago, the naysayers in my county said, you will never take the government back. They said, you can never elect a fiscal conservative in Milwaukee County, of all places. Well, think about it. We've done that not once, not twice, but 3 times. The last time, I got 60% of the vote in a county that went 2/3 of the vote for Obama. How about that to the naysayers? 8 years ago, the naysayers said, you can't balance the budget without raising property taxes from the previous year. So it just can't be done. Well, last fall, I introduced my 8th consecutive budget without raising property taxes from the previous year. We did it the old-fashioned way. We actually cut our debt, reduced the size of the government workforce. Because of that, the national bond rating agencies a couple weeks ago, yet again, gave us a positive outlook after I improved our bond rating, even while the state's has gone down over the past 8 years. And a year ago, when the state of Wisconsin had the largest budget deficit ever, we had an $8.9 million surplus. Now contrast that not just the state, but as I read in the Wisconsin State Journal just the other day, This county, under the county executive that proposed a 7.9% increase in the property tax levy, finished off the year with a deficit and had to dig into the contingency fund to try and bail itself out. That's the contrast. We face the same challenges in Milwaukee County as Dane County does. We finished with a surplus, and we did it without proposing a tax levy increase. We did it in addition to just budgeting and finances. We did it with services as well. In fact, last year when I went around the state, one of my stops was over at the Henry Farm announcing our campaign for governor. A guy from this neck of the woods, Joe Waunakee, was state party chair still at that time, ran around the state saying, hey, you know what? You look at all this, and Scott Walker, he's balanced the budget, he's holding the line on taxes, but he's killing services. He's killing services. In fact, he specifically went after me on the parks. Well, Joe doesn't talk about that anymore. You know why? Last October, we won the gold medal for the best park system in the entire country. Doesn't talk about that anymore. Years ago, before I came into office, there was a waiting list of literally 3,000 older adults waiting for long-term care services. Today, we're the first successful family care program in the state of Wisconsin. And because of that, there's not one older adult in my community that's on a waiting list for long-term care services. A couple weeks ago, I was at our airport announcing that while most national airports at the beginning of this year saw about a 3% drop in passengers, we saw a 41.5% increase. That's because over the last 8 years, we've made nearly $200 million worth of new investments without a penny of tax levy in there. $200 million worth of new investments in our airport that helped us double the size of our parking, expand our concourses, remodel our center concourse, concessionary area. We did all those things which attracted Southwest to come in for the first time. It brought Frontier back through Republic. It expanded and created a new hub for AirTran. While Delta and other airlines to come on in, that added 1,000 new airline jobs in our airport alone. And because of that, we not only saw a 41.5% increase, we're now not only one of the most convenient airports in the Midwest, we're actually $81 less on average airfare than O'Hare. The reason I tell you all those things is, in my mind, if we can balance the budget, do it without proposing tax increases, and still provide for the core services and investment that people demand in my county, we can take on the political machine in Milwaukee County, of all places, and win not just at the ballot box, but win in how we govern. I have no doubt in my mind down the way in Madison and the Capitol, we together can take on the political machine there and win for all of the taxpayers of this great state. I just know we can do it. I'm running for governor, like I said, because I love this state, and I believe in Wisconsin. So I've traveled this state. I've found from one end to the other, our people are our greatest asset, and our people are good. We've got a great workforce, the kind of people who embody the Midwestern work ethic, the kind of people you not only build your company around, but your community and ultimately your state around. We've got a state filled with just tremendous employers, many times 2 or 3 or 4 generations deep of family-owned businesses. And for those that aren't, they treat their employees like family. And they're vested here. They want to grow here. What I hear more often than not from employers is simply this: Scott, help get government out of the way, because we want to add more people in this state. That we want to put more people to work in the state that we love. But it's just not happened under this current climate. We're a state blessed with abundant natural resources. No other state in the Union is surrounded by 2 Great Lakes and the greatest river in the U.S. We're filled with 15,000 inland lakes. That's 5,000 more than Minnesota. Eat your heart out, Brett Favre. When I look at this state, I think, having grown up in a town of 8,000 and now living in the largest county in the state, for my money, big or small and everywhere in between, there's no place in the world better to grow up in, to live in, to play in, to raise a family in, to build a business in, someday to retire in. There's no place in the world better than our Wisconsin. What I found traveling this state as a candidate over the past year is what's failing us is not our people or our places. What's failing us is our government. And the good news I tell you here this afternoon is, come November 2nd of this year, we can do something about that. Come this November, we the people of Wisconsin, can stand up and reclaim our rightful place in history. We the people of Wisconsin can stand up and once and for all put the government back on the side of the people. We the people of Wisconsin can stand up and once and for all make this a Wisconsin we can believe in again. That's why I'm running for governor. That's why I'm here today again in Waunakee. That's why I'm proud to talk to you and ask for your support. But most importantly, that's why I'm here to ask for your vote. Thanks for the chance to share. And if you guys like, I can entertain a couple of questions. I don't want to keep you over your time, but probably got us out the door by 1 for everybody. Sure.
You mentioned in the course of your speech about reducing the tax burden, reducing regulatory burden, and cutting costs as kind of three primary areas.
Yep.
If you were governor and looking at it from a statewide perspective, what are the top things in each of those categories you would attack first?
Taxes, I think, right off the bat, you got to lower individual income taxes across the board. That affects not only individual taxpayers, but one thing most people in Madison, at least in the capital, don't get because they've never signed the front of a paycheck, is most employers in this state pay individual income taxes, not corporate income taxes. That's why you got to reduce the individual income tax rates. I think the more aggressively, effectively, and immediately you do that, the more money you put back in people's hands. Not only will it truly help stimulate the economy, in turn it will help you balance the biennial budget. In states that have done that aggressively, which sometimes some people in the Capitol don't understand, they think, well, how do you pay for a tax cut? If you do a tax cut effectively, it actually pays for itself and some. States that have aggressively cut the tax burden as well as other things to ease the regulatory and litigation burden are states that have seen increases in their revenue into their treasury, because as more people get more money back and more businesses get more money back, they put that back into investments in more capital and more workers and more jobs. More people work, they all pay more taxes, albeit at a lower rate, and that gets things going again. It happened even nationally. You think about 1983, when the Reagan tax cuts were fully enacted. From 83 through the end of the decade, we saw the largest peacetime economic boom in American history. 21 million new jobs, 5 million new businesses, and money into the federal treasury actually went up. It's what's called the Laffer curve. Professor Laffer is actually helping me on our campaign. But it's one of those where but you can't do it through things like rebate checks. You remember when President Bush a few years ago pushed a check back? Checkbacks don't work. Cutting the marginal tax rate does. Nobody goes out and buys a new car, a new boat, a new house, a new tractor. You don't buy any of those things based on a one-time check. You buy them on knowing year after year after year my tax burden is going to be less. So first thing off is the taxes. Excuse me. In terms of regulations, I put a moratorium on any new administrative codes and then try and narrow down the administrative code, which a lot of people don't know has the force of law in the state, even though no lawmaker votes on it directly. I think you got to clamp down on that. Any of you in farming know all the challenges with groundwater issues and non-point runoff and all the other things. Any of you are local officials know the problems the DNR is pushing with phosphorus and the wastewater treatment issues that are going to cost us tens of millions of dollars. Those are all things we got to clamp down on. There are viable alternatives that are much more cost effective than all those things. We got to get in there immediately and start clamping down on that. And the other part on spending, you got to do it. What we've done in Milwaukee County, it's not picking on public employees. I'm a public servant. I like public employees. But the reality is you got to have wages and benefits that are compatible with the private sector. In our county, we made modest adjustments in this last budget. We've had a number of our unions settle, a number of others who have not. All of our non-union employees have this. We took a pay freeze. We capped off our step increases. We took our multiplier from 2.0 down to 1.6, and we asked for $30 more per month in a health care premium. Those things alone in our county saved us $10.3 million. You add that, we've got 5,700 employees. The state has 69,000. You do things like that, you can save, not just for this budget, but they're the sorts of things that, frankly, GM and Chrysler should have done years ago, and they'd be in a much better position today. We have to do that to balance not only the upcoming budget, but future budgets. And then there's other things like waste. You look at Wisconsin Shares, the child care program, which was once a temporary safety net for people as they stepped out of welfare into the workforce. Under this governor, it's become a permanent entitlement program, and because of that, it's opened the door to fraud and abuse. We got to clamp down on that, go back to time limits, and make sure we clamp down and prosecute those involved with fraud. Not that I've thought about it, but.
What do you propose to do? You were talking about waste. What's your proposal for all the excess, empty, state-owned facilities and state-owned lands that Wisconsin now has?
Sure. Well, I think in terms of properties, we need to consolidate the staffing we have into the maximum uses possible. For those spaces that we're not using or don't have any foreseeable use, we need to sell off or get out of leases. If they're leases, or sell off outright. In terms of excess land, we need to sell off that as well, although I would caution not to do that solely for the purpose of balancing the next budget. To me, I've tried to use and switch from my county in the past, they use land sales for operating expenses to try and balance the upcoming budget. what we shifted from in the last year, I'll continue to do in this next budget, is to shift so that land sales are used for one-time cost. So if there's a match of something you have to have for some program, that's a one-time cost to start up something, say, from the federal government, you use it for that match. If there's a capital expenditure you have to have, instead of bonding for that or a portion of that, you use a land sale to do that. I think there are things we could do. We could buy down debt so that our debt service payments ongoing and each biannual budget would go down, that we could buy down with the proceeds from land sales so that it's not just a one-time fix, it's a long-term fix. It's the converse of that is what this governor did in this last budget. He took $2.2 billion with a B, $2.2 billion worth of federal stimulus aid, didn't use it for bridges or roads or anything else that was what everybody thought it was for. He used it to balance the state budget. That means the next governor has already got a hole there. In fact, today, before any agency request, there's a $2.4 billion hole. That's $800 million worse than it was 2 years ago. And we need to make sure we not only balance this budget, but we don't do it by pushing problems off to the future, but instead deal with them today. It's why my debt is down 28% through 2012.
One thing that seems to be a money pit to me, and maybe you can educate me, I'm puzzled about it. The Marquette Interchange in Milwaukee County, the money spent on repair of that exceeded the proposed high-speed rail project, right? And
Almost identical, actually.
yeah, I went to Marquette for 7 years, and I was down there last Friday again, and it's kind of like, this isn't a new gateway to the west, you know what I mean? It's a repair of something that was there. And when I was in Europe a couple years ago, traveling France, Switzerland, Italy, and down to Monaco, I'm in this little car that hadn't put gas in for a couple of days, right? And I'm thinking, well, why is this car so nice? It's quiet, smooth, and then I realized going through the mountains in an industrial area in Italy, the road was like a velvet on a pool table. Okay. And so in July and August, when I was over there, I did not see any road construction except one night in the city on a side street. So they seem to be getting more bang for their buck as far as roads. We're throwing money at roads here like nuts. And it's not getting any more fun to drive to Chicago or Milwaukee on the interstate. Hazardous. So what if you take the engineers or the politicians or whatever over to France and buy dinner and they copy the homework and some of the engineers over there can just duplicate, like the Japanese duplicate our stuff. I mean, they must be doing something better. And I was talking to a supervisor this morning from Sauk County, and he says, and he used to work for the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
And he says, the roads seem to be getting worse quicker. And I said, yeah, that was my gut feeling too.
Well, I think about the Europe part, I'm not certain because I don't know the mechanics of what goes up on Europe. But I do know that in general, one of the things to look at for the future, one of the frustrations I've had with this current administration is the Transportation Planning Commission hasn't met for the past 8 years. And that was really transportation experts who laid out, it wasn't politicians, it was people who, that's what they study, that's what they do, that's what they focus on, who would set out a course for the transportation needs of the state that were based on where true needs were and how to maximize the value of that. I think part of that means following that, restoring that Transportation Planning Commission. The other part means when making bids, not just here but in other areas, the bid shouldn't just be about the lowest bid possible, although you're trying to maximize the value to the taxpayers. It should also be about some core minimum in terms of what the quality is, meaning if you might get a low bid, but if it lasts twice as long to go a little bit further up the bid process, it might be worth it in the long run for the taxpayers of the state to take the second one from the bottom, not just the first. To me, there are ways you can incorporate that so you pre-qualify bidders, not just on road projects, but other projects, to say, here's the minimum standard levels, and then you can low bid it after that so that you maximize your quality. That's something I think needs to be done in any number of areas, not just with roads, but in many areas where the state does procurement and bidding process.
Gordy mentioned how the roads stay up. I would imagine that I watch interstate and I sit in my woods and count the trucks. There are 600 and more. I bet that doesn't happen in Europe.
No, you're probably right about that. And part of it's just, it goes back to the 60s with the start of the federal interstate system. And you've got a very, compared to Europe, you've got a very just different culture in terms of how even freight train versus truck traffic on our highways and interstate system and things of that nature. It's why in the state we've made a push, and you particularly see it in the southern third of the state, a greater push through the Department of Transportation partnering with freight train services to get some of that off of the interstate system. And I think there'll be more of that push in the future. But that's very much used in Europe. Sure, way back there.
Last week, our current governor announced a rail stop, the high-speed rail back on Madison. I think I saw a quote from you that said, if you were elected, you would stop that.
Yes.
So that my first question was, did you say that? And you said yes.
Yes.
Secondly, can you do that in-house?
Yeah. Well, anything, and I'll give you a parallel to what I did 8 years ago. 8 years ago when I came in, my predecessor had legally obligated Milwaukee County to put up a 3.5-story blue shirt on the outside of the parking structure at the airport. It was one of these public art things, and it was going to be this kind of bluish transparent shirt. And I said, this makes no sense. It's an illogical. I have nothing against art, but it just didn't fit. It stuck out like a sore thumb. And I got all sorts of critics who said, what do you know about art and this and that? And I said, I'm not professing anything about art. I just know parking garage by the airport's not the place to put a 3.5-story blue shirt. And I said, I'm not going to pay for it. And so I went to my corporation counsel and said, figure out a way for me to break this lease and break this agreement, and I did. And we settled. We still got some other art that's inside of the parking structure that this same artist from New York did. But early on, even the New York Times said, "Oh, well, you can't do this. He's not going to be able to do this. They're going to block him." Well, we just said no. We're not going to do it. And in the end, the guy still wanted to be a part of it, and he participated. And the last thing he wanted, in this case, a guy who does a lot of public art, was to hear that he got into a fight with the people who were in the government, because then no other government would ever want to work with him again. So I figured, you work your angles. In this case, not only would I stop it, and people say, well, what happens if they put $40 to $50 million into the ground? Well, one, I think that would be a mistake. But as I understand, the only thing high speed about this is how quickly the Department of Transportation is working to get it in before I'm the governor. But I said, even if they put $40 to $50 million in, to me, it's kind of like, if you're on a diet and you eat a donut, do you say, oh, what the heck, I'm going to eat the whole box? Well, we can't afford, even if they put $40 to $50 million in, we can't afford the ongoing cost of this. For starters, $810 million is not going to be the full cost. Anywhere in the world, not just in the country, the cost far exceeds. We're talking about an 80-mile strip from downtown Milwaukee to the airport and out to down by the Monona Terrace. You look at California's doing high-speed rail, $65 million per mile. You look in Spain, where they're doing something similar, $51 million per mile. It will be nowhere near the cost they're talking about. Who gets to pick that up? We all do. But just assume for a minute it is $810 million. Every year it will cost up to $10 million to operate that. And that's at the conservative end, because, again, we know those estimates are usually off. Well, anybody in this room want to pay an extra tax to cover the $10 million per year it's going to cost for the high-speed rail line? Didn't think so. Well, if you don't want that, then the only other place to turn to is the State Transportation Fund, a fund, as I mentioned before, that has literally been rated $1.3 billion out. So I haven't found a whole lot of people, even in Madison and Milwaukee, who tell me that they want us to stop work on the road out front of their house, or the county trunk road down the way, or the interstate system between here and Milwaukee, and say, no, just push that aside so that we can spend all this money on a high-speed rail line. Particularly when you realize for all that money, you know how many permanent jobs, the federal government says, not me, will be created from this? 55. That's more than $14.5 million per job. I think most of us in this room could create a whole lot more jobs than one for $14.5 million. So it's not that I'm against rail. I think the Hiawatha, I think Amtrak, I think there's value to all that. But I just think pouring all this into something, particularly when, unlike even, for example, between Milwaukee and Chicago, there's a significant usage there. But it's because, not just for Milwaukee folks, but if you come over from Milwaukee, then you don't want to go all the way down to Chicago. You don't want to get stuck in the Edens and problems like that. Okay, there's some value, but there's, you know, millions and millions and millions of people in the Chicago area. There's a reason for that. It's a viable alternative to the congestion, and even in terms of cost for the parking you have to have in downtown Chicago, it makes some sense. For me to go the way they originally proposed it, where I live in Wauwatosa to the Capitol, I used to be able to get from my house to the Capitol in an hour and 15 minutes, door to door. My Saturn, it was less than a quarter of a tank of gas, you know, so it's a fraction of the cost. I get there quicker than I would on a train, because under their proposal, for me to go to downtown Milwaukee, to pay $8 to park there, takes me 10, 15 minutes to get downtown, to get on the train, assuming I'm there right at the right time, 45 minutes to get over to the airport, and then take another 15-minute trip either on a bus or a taxi to go to the Capitol. It took me more time, and it cost me 3 times as much on the train. Why would I do that? It just doesn't make any sense. Trains make sense in longer distance. That's why they work in Europe, where you go longer distances, you know, from one place to the next. High speed works. It's been, you know, it's part of the tradition. We can do that if you're going from, you know, Chicago to Milwaukee up to the Twin Cities or places like that. But adding it in a short range where there's not congestion, it's just not a viable alternative from my standpoint. But you know, you've got people that just say they have to have it. The other thing to be mindful is the mayor of Madison, the mayor of Milwaukee, and the governor all say, well, if we don't use this money, it'll go somewhere else. Well, besides the fact that just on the surface, I'd say, yeah, but if we can't afford it, I'd rather not spend it. It's kind of like we used to have a group that would auction off, as part of a raffle, a house. You could win a new house. And it sounds great until you realize when you won the house, it was 3 times as much as your current house, which means your top property taxes go up 3 times as much as you pay. You have to pay a winner's fee in terms of taxes on top of that. And you have all the other additional upkeep that you didn't have at your house that was 1/3 of the cost. So suddenly now the house that was free, you can't afford. That's the same principle here to me, is if we can't afford it, we shouldn't take the money. Not to mention, the practical reality is we have in the past, when Tommy Thompson was governor, made appeals to the federal government, through our congressional delegation, to reprogram dollars so that it's spent on things other than what it was originally spent for. So in this case, I don't see any reason why we couldn't go to our delegation and say, we have needs when it comes to roads and bridges here. We ask you to reprogram that money from this high-speed rail line to something we actually need and can afford here in the state of Wisconsin. Sure, maybe one last one, and then let you guys get on the way.
I just, sport and education, I just got on the school board.
Yeah.
We just had a meeting that you're learning about revenue caps, and have any thoughts on revenue caps and aids that the state's giving? It sounds like it's killing a lot of districts.
It is. Declining enrollment's a problem all across the state. We got to deal with that in the school aid formula. But immediately, in the short term, you know, this governor talked about being pro-education, and he's done anything but that. He cut hundreds of millions of dollars from public education this last budget, but more devastating was the fact they repealed the QEO, the Qualified Economic Offer. Now, the one thing I always thought teachers were right about when they complained about was that it didn't apply to others. My answer is not to repeal it from schools, but to add towns and villages and cities and counties to have some sort of wage and benefit control as well, because if you don't, again, it all goes right out the window. Without some sort of cap on wages and benefits, any money you get from the state or from the local property taxpayer can't be put into the classroom, because it'll just immediately get eaten up, particularly through benefit costs, even more so than wages. We got to give local school boards the ability to control that. On top of that, in more mid-range, we got to deal with mandates, similar to some of the questions that were asked here before, but mandates on school districts, everything from special ed, which is both the state and federal mandate, which has never been fully funded or hasn't been fully funded in decades, combined with just individual mandates, for which, again, I'd put a moratorium on, and then I'd go through every mandate and see what we could do to either repeal it or to fund it, but not have unfunded mandates out there for you. So I do all that, and then I think the other part is more, and a little bit more long-term, is look at the state healthcare plan and say, if we would allow individual school districts to tap into that and say, if you want to get state aid, you either have to tap into that, which an independent report a few years ago said could save as much as $100 million per year, or if you can find a cheaper plan, we'll gladly let you do that. But we're not going to let individual school districts, of which we provide on average 2/3 of the funding for statewide, tap into local health care plans, which are more often not driven by the local school or by the local teachers union, the WA Trust, be higher than what we're paying for healthcare costs for state employees. If we're going to put 60% of the state budget into local aids and the majority of that into schools, we should demand that the money we're spending is spent effectively and allow school districts to tap into that state health plan or tap into the lower plan if they haven't. All those things I think would help make sure more of those dollars go in the classroom. Britt?
I'll just jump in quick and talk about next week, and we'll get to any other questions then. Greeters are Luke Tierney and John Townley, prayer by Pat Durden, and we're going to have classification talks next week. So if you want to stay and ask some more questions, please do so. You have time?
Yeah, a couple of minutes, sure. Thank you.
Scott, we've had some governors in the past that have been, I would say, artists with the line item veto. What's your stance on the line item?
Yeah, where are we at? Right here. Come on over here if you want.
The states have reduced on the income tax. Well, it looks like these guys must be wanting to grab me for a second. Hey, good to see you.
Hi, Scott. Could we get a response real quickly to Mark Newman's, I guess, announcement that he's not going to be seeking the endorsement at the convention?
Yeah. In our case, we're going to stay focused on seeking the support of the grassroots conservative activists from all 72 counties across the state. I mean, these are the people on the ground. They're the people that not only are part of the party, they're part of the conservative movement, they're part of the grassroots movement. It really spurred the Tea Parties across the state. And I'm going to continue to seek to have their support, not only in terms of an endorsement at the convention, but their support all the way through the fall elections.
Is this undermining what's become the traditional process at the convention?
No, I mean, I just think it's a sign that, for somebody who spent the beginning of this year going to Lincoln Day dinners and Republican functions, caucuses, even called the delegates, I think what happened was he was seeking to have that kind of support and then realized the grassroots activists, the conservatives across the state had already picked a candidate for governor. And I don't think it undermines it. I think it just reinforces that they've seen the leadership we provide in our county, and they like to have me do it across the state.
Mayor Barrett picked up the Professional Police Association endorsement yesterday. He kind of raised the specter of you making cuts to law enforcement should you become governor. Maybe a quick response on that.
Well, the irony is the Milwaukee Police Association, the cops in Milwaukee who work under his leadership, endorsed me. And the reason they did is because I have not furloughed police officers. I've not furloughed sheriff's deputies. Tom Barrett's the only person in this race who's furloughed police officers, and he's doing them right now. So I think it's pretty clear where he and I stand when it comes to law enforcement. That's why the cops in his city endorsed me and will be supporting me throughout the campaign. And I think part of this was a distraction with a group that's in the past been more historically aligned with the Democrats. But if you look at the rank and file in the city of Milwaukee, the place where they know Tom Barrett the best, they put their support behind me.
I just want to make sure that I heard you say something during the question and answer period here. You said something about a QEO type cap on earnings for public employees. Did you mean, and as governor, would you try to pass a bill that put a QEO on all public employees?
Well, I try to give the ability for us to control wages and benefits. It's a tremendous challenge for people all across the state, whether it be in town government, school districts, county government, state government. There's got to be some sort of control on wages and benefits because right now the current system doesn't work. So the only exception I'd look at is we treat, when it comes to the retirement system, we treat protectives, both fire and police officers, differently in terms of what the protective status is there. I can see keeping that under the current system, but I think overall there's got to be some ability for local officials to have better control over their budget.
So a formal QEO?
I don't know. I wouldn't call it QEO. I think there are even holes with the current QEO, or the QEO as it was up until it was repealed, but I think there's got to be some way to control wages and benefits.
Scott, real quickly, did you ever consider delegating somebody else to do the Harley tour, given the fact that you're a candidate? We know it's a promotion for the county, but the perception has been raised that this amounts to a campaign event just because of the fact that you're getting statewide exposure and it's happening so close to the convention.
Yeah, well, two different parts in that. One, I don't stop doing my job. I was a candidate before the ride last year, and I did effectively the same thing I've done for the past 7 years before this year's ride. For me, essentially that's like saying I should stop doing my job. And in any role, I get publicity, good or bad, in the job that I do as the county executive, and I get in many cases that publicity statewide, whether it's on a Harley or it's something I do in my office. When I cut taxes, I get good publicity that has a political benefit, but I do it because it's my job. When the airport numbers are improved dramatically, more dramatically than any airport in the country, I get good publicity statewide because I'm doing my job. In this case, it's another example of doing my job, and just because I get value out of that, it's solely because of the fact that I'm doing a good job. In terms of the timing, we've done this now, since 2003. We've done this every year in either May or June, and quite frankly, politically, I'd be better off if I wasn't doing that this week. I'd be better off going to individual party events, gearing up for the state party convention. So, from a political standpoint, it's not actually advantageous for me. I'd be better spent as a candidate showing up votes with Republican Party officials, whereas on the ride, as I've done every time in the past, I don't have any connection to anybody politically. I don't talk about anything politically. I only talk about tourism, and I'll do it again this year.